And now it's time for The Catch, where we put a spotlight on reporting from and about the Great Lakes.
The National Park Service has been conducting controlled burns in the Indiana Dunes National Park. Joseph Peet is a reporter and columnist for the Times of Northwest Indiana and has been following the story.
This spring, the National Park Service completed controlled burns of 900 acres of parkland across the Indiana Dunes National Park. Every year, typically, they burn about 10% of the 15,000 acres of the park, but it really does serve a number of functions. It helps improve the plant growth. It helps improve the nutrients in the soil. It, burns dead and dying plants.
But the main function of the controlled burns might seem to be the most counterintuitive one. There are about 60,000 wildfires nationally every year. By conducting prescribed burns more regularly, it reduces the risk and extent of dangerous wildfires.
In 2021, there was a massive wildfire at the Ivanhoe Nature Preserve in Gary that raged for 20 hours before they were able to finally put it out. Here in Northwest Indiana, our national park is spread throughout industry, throughout neighborhoods, throughout homes, and they credit the controlled burns they had done in that area with actually saving the property.
However, the practice of controlled burns isn't new.
The indigenous tribes have been using prescribed burns for centuries to manage the land. They view it as kind of a medicine that restores and renews land. It helps make the land more productive. In this area, specifically the Potawatomi tribe has long used prescribed burns as a way of renewing the land and also minimizing the risk of wildfires.
But there was a period of time when the practice of controlled burns was halted.
Around the time the National Park Service was starting in the late 1800s, the idea kind of caught on that fire was bad, it was destructive. They kind of took a complete prohibition attitude toward it. That really led them to take a no wildfire approach.
After decades of research, the benefits of controlled burns became more apparent.
In the late 60s, scientists started to really study the effects on the ecology and study the impact that fire had, and they concluded that it had a lot of natural benefits. And by the 1986, the Indiana Dunes National Park started returning to prescribed burns as a way of managing the areas, particularly in this area, the tall grass prairie, the oak and savanna habitat they've sought to restore.
And so the National Park Service continues the controlled burns to this day.
It's really a way of preventing wildfires from raging uncontrolled and rampant throughout the entire national park, and also from posing a threat to property and human life at the many homes and businesses and so forth just outside the park.
With about 9,500 miles of coastline, the Great Lakes are home to nearly 400 lighthouses. And one of those lighthouses, located in Duluth, Minnesota, has a new owner.
The lighthouse is called the Duluth Harbor North Pierhead Light, but most people in Duluth just know it as one of the two lighthouses that are in Canal Park. And Canal Park is the tourist district in Duluth, and it's also the place where the big ships come through the canal into the Duluth Harbor.
Dan Crocker is a correspondent for Minnesota Public Radio News, and he reported on the lighthouse when its ownership was passed from the U.S. Coast Guard to a Minnesota nonprofit.
This group, Rethos out of St. Paul, they plan to make it a centerpiece for this historic district. They do plan to offer tours, and then they plan to have a lot of educational signage around the lighthouse as well. And they really see it as a way to educate the thousands of tourists who come to Duluth about the historic nature of Canal Park and the lighthouse itself.
Dan says that this restoration fits into a larger trend of Great Lakes cities and towns revitalizing their historic structures.
I see this purchase and the plans for this lighthouse as really fitting in more broadly to what's been going on in Duluth for decades, and I think in cities around the Great Lakes, that have these really beautiful historic buildings that maybe have fallen on some hard times. But as, these cities around the lakes revitalize, I think there's a lot of interest in also, bringing back these beautiful one-of-a-kind historic buildings that really speak to the sense of place of the Great Lakes.
But Dan believes that lighthouses are especially important to many people that call the Great Lakes home.
These lighthouses were these beacons, to safely bring ships and their crews in. And I think people still really relate to that. But I think these, the efforts to restore these structures really fit with, I just think the deep-seated passion that folks have for these unique buildings.
There's a new film showcasing a number of Detroit-based organizations dedicated to getting communities of color outdoors and into nature. Nina Ignazik is the founder of environmental newsletter Planet Detroit and the director of a new film called Claiming Connections.
So the film Claiming Connections is about a variety of groups that have emerged over the past few years that have the goal of getting people of color outdoors to get out kayaking, to get out hiking, to get out birding by providing opportunities that are really geared toward groups and making people of color feel really comfortable in the outdoor environment.
The emergence of these groups has partially happened as a response to an ongoing and deeply rooted problem.
There is a long history of people of color being marginalized in outdoor spaces and outdoor recreation across the country. And so we wanted to lay that groundwork to help people understand the context in which these groups are operating and why it's so imperative that they're successful in their mission. These programs are really geared towards a whole spectrum of people, kids all the way up through adults. In a lot of cases, adults in Detroit may not have ever had these kinds of experiences.
And Detroit has a wide variety of groups dedicated to this cause.
I believe that Detroit is a leader in this space. I haven't found very many other examples of grassroots groups that are forming and successfully working to provide such a broad variety of opportunities for families, individuals, kids of color to get out and do a whole host of outdoor activities.